All right, it's the top of the hour. I think we shall start. Welcome everyone to the first IETF meeting of the year. This is the REGEXT interim meeting. Like all internet IETF meetings, I present you the not well. This not well reminds us about the policies that all of participants must attend in attending the IETF meetings. And also the not really well. They are the best common practices regarding about how we should interact with each other during IETF meetings and the mailing list. Of course, this code of conduct, so please read it carefully, and we all must follow it. Okay, let's see the agenda for today. This interim meeting will focus on discussing the APP extension registry draft regarding the use the IETF namespace and schema in developing internet draft specifications and non-IETF extensions. The topics for today is a quick introduction, 5 minutes from Scott. Thank you, Scott. And then 50 minutes for comment, questions, and the discussion as a whole. Please raise your hand if you want to participate. And please, let's try to keep it on the technical side, okay? And the end of the hour, we have 5 minutes for any other business if we have time. So let me try to change the slides and load the slides from Scott.
While you're doing that, Jorge, if I may, I just want to state clearly for the record, for everyone here, that I am participating as a participant and not as a chair of REGEXT for this discussion. So I leave that to you, Jorge. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jim. All right, Scott, you should have the control of the slides now.
Yep, sure looks like it. Thank you, Jorge. So 5 minutes. I'm going to blow through this relatively short slide deck as quickly as I can. Ultimately, there are a couple of high-level questions that I'd like to focus the discussion on, because as I was looking at needed text changes for the draft, the mailing list discussion did not, in my mind, produce any kind of clear consensus on an approach to deal with these two topics. So I'm hoping we have some live conversation here. We get a better sense of direction. So first off, what is the purpose of this registry as described in RFC 7451? Right, it boils down to helping to manage and coordinate the development of protocol extensions. Right, it's about awareness. And I say here the author's intention, noting that 7451 was not a product of a working group. Right, this was an individual submission that was ultimately AD sponsored and pushed through that way. So any gaffes, gotchas, and things that are messed up in there are likely a result of my own contributions. Okay, we can't blame the working group. But still, having said that, my intention was always that this be about registering mature specifications, right? Not specific implementations. And this is an important point to keep in mind as we talk about where we need to be going forward. So what are the questions? So first off, we've had some on-list discussion about how to deal with, or if we should even allow the registration of extensions that use internet drafts as specifications, right? Drafts are not mature specifications. As a result, they've caused a little bit of concern and problems, particularly around the use of IETF namespace URIs for the XML schemas and namespaces. The associated IETF XML registry requires RFC specifications to register those. Drafts aren't RFCs, rock, hard place. Okay, keep that in mind. And then secondly, we've had some situations in the past where we've seen non-IETF extensions that were registered with IETF XML namespace or schema URIs. This was likely a result of the designated expert, me, who was not quite as diligent in calling these out as issues, and we'd like to put some guidance in the RFC 7451 bis to better deal with this situation going forward. So, about internet drafts. It's currently possible to register them. There's nothing specific in 7451 that says, nope, you can't do that. And important to note that drafts commonly include URIs that identify an XML namespace, an XML schema, or both. We're talking about drafts that go through the working group process, right? And traditionally, these have used URIs from an IETF namespace. And as I mentioned before, RFC 3688, which is the RFC that describes the IETF XML registry, it requires that use of these IETF namespace URIs have an RFC specification. The text actually says something along the lines of the registration must have gone through the IETF consensus process, which means that they must be RFCs. So why is this a problem for us? Because we found that we've had some internet drafts that get abandoned by REGEXT, but they've actually had implementations prior to their abandonment. And this provides a little bit of problems because 7451 doesn't specifically provide guidance on what to do with the URIs. But 3688, here's the actual text I'm talking about. It says that in order to register those URIs, they must have been through the IETF consensus process, and which means that they must be documented in an RFC. Unfortunately, drafts have not been through the IETF consensus process. So, big question for us. What guidance should be added to 7451 bis regarding internet draft specifications? Okay. Number 2, for discussion. So, we've had different opinions here about what to do with drafts. Should we not allow them? Should we allow them on a provisional basis? Should we allow registration of the drafts without requiring registration of the URIs? Should we allow registration of the drafts and require registration of the namespace and schema URIs, which is going to force us to do something different in the case of these IETF namespace URIs? And then there's a corollary to that. Should we always require registration of the namespace and schema URIs, even if we're talking about non-IETF specifications using non-IETF namespaces? And I think that's actually my last slide. I'll stop there. Let's talk, folks. Can we start with the basic question, which is here? Internet drafts, right? Should we allow registration of internet drafts?
Antoine?
So I'm the first in the queue without any hat on as a participant. Scott, I think when we started with this registry, we had 2 use cases, and the original goal was let's at least try to gather all the extensions that are out there to see if we can harmonize them and put them, the ones that look similar, put them in one standard extension that could accommodate all. But we didn't want to exclude, proprietary extensions for a single registry or a single use case to be registered. And those proprietary registrations, the only requirement there was is that it had a stable documentation, right? So the way I see it, when I look at the EPP extensions registry at the moment, we have a document status which says standard track or informational or other. And for a registration as other, so a proprietary registration, the only requirement was that it had a stable documentation, and an internet draft was considered to be a stable documentation. Because even though an internet draft wouldn't, even if an internet draft would eventually be published, the document itself would be a stable documentation. So I'm tending here to say allow internet drafts, but only because there was no consensus. And an internet draft itself, if people decide to implement a proprietary extension when there is collision in the namespace, it's your own risk. And you don't have that risk when it's a standards track extension. So I would say allow registration of internet drafts, but don't require the registration of namespace or schema. That's only a requirement when it goes through the IETF process, and it's when it becomes an RFC, you have to register your namespace. I don't know enough about namespaces, so this is my question. Will that cause problems or collisions? So that's basically the question. The question that I asked. So a little bit of background, proprietary and standard extensions. And my question is, if proprietary extensions don't need to register their namespace, will that cause issues? There's somebody that can answer that.
Consider myself confused.
Yeah, well, yes, I think, Jorge, I think everybody is allowed to open their mic, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Raise your hand except for going into the queue. So
It's a very pointed question about registering the URIs might have cause issues, right? I think the short answer is yes. Right? Particularly when you see, we've seen proprietary extensions that inadvertently use URIs from the IETF. And I think that happens somewhat out of ignorance because the specification is talking with the state of the RFCs, which is commonly a URI that uses the IETF namespace. And they really don't know anything. So, they copy something over. And so this is something that the DE evaluation process should be catching. And to that point, I think we've gotten better about it. And we've seen this happen recently. We've given some advice to the requesters. Hey, you're using these URIs in the IETF namespace. This is a proprietary extension. You can do something different. And the requesters have, I think, 100% unanimously conformed or complied with those requests.
I'm sorry, Scott. It's really hard to hear you. Your audio is going out.
Yeah, it was the reason I muted and got my video back, right? Because you were breaking up a little bit, Scott.
No, let's see. I'm trying to find mic settings here. Well, if someone else wants to talk while I'm looking for my mic settings, please do.
I'll jump in.
Yeah,
I'll jump in if possible. Of the options you present here, Scott, I believe 3 is the right one. I don't think we'll have much of a choice but allow for the registration of IETF drafts. I certainly don't believe that there should be a dependency on the registration of the namespaces and URIs, since there's a mix of extensions that may or may not be IETF specifications. So I would leave the registration of namespaces and schemas up to the IETF process and go back to the purpose of the EPP extension registry in the first place, which was not to force registration of namespaces, but to publish the existence of a specification for the EPP extension. And I need to point out the fact that in the existing ICANN registry agreement, there is a hard requirement currently for deployments of EPP extensions to register. So that would mean that registries would have to be able to register, otherwise they could not deploy. And if they can't deploy, then we're going to have issues related to not getting implementation experience for internet drafts that can take years to become RFC. So I think it's number 3. Thank you.
We have a bulleted list here rather than a numbered list. So can I just confirm, Jim, that your recommendation is allow registration of internet drafts, but don't require registration of the namespace and schema URIs?
That's correct. Yeah, we'll be liberal on it. in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know I'm jumping the queue. Sorry, Andy. I agree with Jim on that one, that I don't think the namespace and schema URIs should be necessarily registered, but I would strongly recommend or request that the draft, that the BIS draft, provide guidance to the registrant on choosing a namespace URI, and also require that they, make sure that they don't cause a collision with an existing registration.
So that there's a question for me to all. So is it possible to register a namespace without an RFC? So if you have an internet draft, can you request for namespace registration even though it's not gone through the process?
The
Yes.
IETF XML registry is there's no requirement for an RFC unless it's an IETF URN. So you can put any URL you like in the namespace registry.
So if I have a license plate registry and I want to register the namespace for my license plate proprietary extension, I'm allowed to do so, right?
Yeah, and you'll see that there's there were some recent additions to the extension registry that were proprietary extensions. I think Tango was the registrant for those, and they did go ahead and add the namespace URLs, which start with HTTP : into the XML registry, because they could do so because they are not URNs in the IETF prefix. So
okay, so then the guidance would be to use a non-IETF namespace.
I think so for a non, yeah, absolutely, for a proprietary extension, absolutely. I think that should be a requirement. In fact, proprietary extensions shouldn't be squatting on IETF namespace. The issue is internet drafts that, for forward compatibility reasons, want to use a consistent namespace URI from version 0.0 of that draft up until RFC, if it ever gets published as an RFC, and that's the kind of circle we have to square, or square we have to circle.
Yeah, so it means that when you want to register an EPP extension, a proprietary XP extension, where the documentation is an internet draft, you cannot use the IETF namespace for the
if there's a requirement to register.
schemas.
If there's a requirement to register the namespace, yes.
There will be no requirement, but it's more guidance, right? Because you can register the namespace or you can't register the namespace, but a proprietary extension has no requirement to do so, but there will be an advice to do so.
Is it my turn?
Yeah, no, it's our turn. We're small group, right?
Yeah, that is correct. There are several registrations in the XML namespace registry that are not IETF namespaces. So, and that's possible to do. It's now, admittedly, historically there was a bit of confusion about that because of the way the IANA had marked up the registry, but that has since been corrected. So, so I think we've got that fixed. But the issue we have to date isn't that we have internet drafts in the EPP extensions registry. There's only one. The issue we have is that we have people using using XML namespace identifiers they're not supposed to be using, and that's where you get collisions, and that's where you get people saying they support an extension that they don't support, or they support an extension that has different references to what the specification is. That is a much bigger problem than actually just being able to put a proprietary extension in the extension registry.
So the other way around, you mean?
Yeah, it is a 6 times bigger problem. So because there are currently, well, when I checked, there were 6 in the registry that do this. So I think that the guidance should be you must register your namespace identifier so we avoid collisions, because collisions are what maybe the registries don't have to deal with, but the registrars do, and it causes a lot of problems. So we should definitely try to work to get the collisions down and make the lives of the registrars easier.
Okay,
That said,
so
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anton.
yeah, so you're saying there should be a requirement to register the namespace even when it's a proprietary extension.
Yeah, and I seriously doubt like a proprietary extension is going to have a collision. But what we do have today is proprietary extensions colliding and misusing the namespaces. That is certainly true today. So, but if we make them register a URI, then we make sure they'll make sure they don't collide, and that'll stop the problem.
You're for bullet point number 4.
Yes, yeah, I don't have a problem with internet drafts being registered so long as we have a process to remove them. Just allowing internet drafts to be registered, which do say work in progress, is short-circuiting the RFC process. All right, so that's that should be if you don't want it to go through the RFC process, it's a proprietary extension. If you want it to go through the IETF process, you have to deal with the fact that the IETF has changed control, and it may get changed. If you're unwilling to do that, that's a proprietary extension, and it's a long-held IETF standard, right? Or IETF policy. So we can put drafts. We should be able to put drafts in the registry. We do want people to be able to provide feedback, correct, during the IETF process. But as long as we have a way of removing them, removing the drafts once the RFC is published, I think that's perfectly fine. And I'm not in favor of like the moment the RFC gets published, we immediately remove the drafts. But there should be a process at some point where we just come back and remove the drafts.
Well, if the namespace doesn't change between the internet draft and the subsequent RFC that is produced, then it's not necessarily a removal of that draft. It's just going to be an update of the existing registration.
Yeah.
But if the author of the draft does what I did with the fee extension and uses a version number in the namespace URI, then obviously there would be multiple entries, and I wonder whether actually that was that great an idea, because we do see proliferation of different versions. I guess the versioning of the namespace URI does help registrars or I should say clients. We should be talking about clients here, not registrars. It does help clients because they know exactly which version of the XML schema they need to apply, and we have issues where there are multiple deployments, all claiming to use the same extension, and that they use the same URI in their greeting, but actually they're using different drafts based on different drafts, and there are differences in schema, and so there's a kind of a rock and a hard place situation where I think there's value in having a stable URI between successive versions of an internet draft and the RFC that finally gets published, and also the benefit it brings to clients in allowing a version number. But then you end up with many entries in the extension registry that all point to something that could be more or less the same. But again, I think there's a cost benefit to there.
No, I think that's manageable. If we wanted to have all versions of an internet draft under one heading in the registry, we can manipulate the registry to figure that out, right? I do think some people find the versioning of the schemas valuable. I don't know how valuable it is, but I think there are people who find it valuable and people who don't find it valuable. So maybe we should
let me jump in on that. Since in implementing the VeriSign EPP SDK, I actually found it exceedingly valuable to version the namespaces. It was especially the case for the registry fee extension. The ability to be able to have many versions implemented by a client or a server in parallel is exceedingly important. And I would just point out, maybe the guidance would be that a proprietary extension should be be allowed to be registered with an IETF namespace.
Well, that is so. If we force them to, that's the problem. If you're not collecting those URIs when they register it, how do you know that? Which is what we have today. So if you say you must register the URI for a proprietary extension, they will try to register it into the 3688 defined registry. And
well, do you have to do it there? Is there any way that we could add a column into the EPP extension registry with the namespaces? Do we actually have to register them elsewhere?
We don't, but why would we need a separate one for that? There's already one established.
The reason why is that there are certain rules to follow to be able to get those officially registered into the other location. All that we want to do is be able to publish what they are in the extensions that are registered in the registry. And if we morph this EPP extension registry to support implementation of specifications, then we need to support multiple URIs that are the same value. They're not unique.
Yeah, well, if it's multiple URIs at the same value for different versions of the draft, you don't have to register into the XML registry multiple times. You just register it once. But I don't think the rules are that onerous. Several people have already done it, and I believe the only thing that was required is the designated experts make sure that the URI is actually a valid URI, which doesn't seem to be a very high hurdle. In fact, I think we'd want that. So I don't see why we'd want a separate column when we already have this registry that exists, which we already use for the RFCs. So having multiple places for people to go check things is also not a good idea. Anyway,
because they're not mature. They're not mature yet. That's the issue. Is if we allow for the registration of drafts into the EPP extension registry, they're not mature yet. There's no need to register them into a central place where they need to be unique.
Well, there's two ways to solve that. You can create a URI scheme, use a URI scheme that is not an IETF URN.
Can I jump into this conversation, please?
Well, 1 minute, Jim. I was going to try to turn it over to you. But the other thing is that we could in the EPP extension registry just say internet drafts do not have to be registered. So. And that may actually be the simpler thing to do, but I do think we need to turn it over to Mr. Galvin because he's been holding it for a while.
Yeah.
Jim, before you start, Gavin, can you mute your mic? We can hear you typing.
Antoine, you're typing. We can hear you.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Jim, please.
Thanks, Jorge. I typed a bunch of stuff in the chat room, but I guess maybe we're not using the chat room and nobody's really looking there. So I guess I'm going to be the heretic in the group. I appreciate that we're solution solving how to register internet drafts, but I want to come back to this point and say, actually, my position is the first bullet. Don't allow registration of internet drafts. In fact, I would start from the following proposition, which is that the registry doesn't allow for internet drafts to be registered. That if we want to do that, we have to explicitly add some text to allow it and deal with it all, which is kind of what you're doing in this discussion, is solution solving for registering. The registry at IANA is specification required, and internet drafts by definition are temporary. And I would argue that that clearly makes them an ineligible specification because they're guaranteed to go away. And therefore they should not be in the registry unless we're going to put all kinds of extra controls and stuff around it. But I would ask the question, why would we want to do that anyway? I asked at one point early on in the chat room, I don't understand what problem we're trying to solve by registering internet drafts. I really don't. I'd appreciate some greater discussion about all of that. From a technical point of view, I don't see any issue. We work on them here, people implement them, we play around for a while, and then eventually we're done and it's going to be an RFC, and then it should be registered if it's a standard. And, that's all good and that works. And I'm not understanding the problem we're solving by registering internet drafts, especially if an internet draft, if its purpose is about an IETF standard, I do think we should have a rule that says IETF standard should use IETF namespaces. Okay, so with that rule, we're avoiding all of those collisions. I do think we should have a rule that says that namespaces should be registered. So, that takes care of that. As a working group, in the IETF, we have processes for dealing with temporary allocation of things and understanding these kinds of things. We do it all the time, getting port numbers and stuff like that. So, I don't see a problem with dealing with that as an ordinary thing. And, proprietary stuff then should not be allowed to use IETF namespaces. And, it's just spec required and it is what it is. So again, I don't think right now, I don't think the registry allows internet drafts. So if we're gonna adopt the new definition of what specification required is, then we do have to do that. So I would appreciate some discussion about why we think we have to register them, because I really am not aware of a technical reason why that's necessary. Thanks.
Can I jump on that really quick? Why?
Yeah, please, James.
Yeah, we really don't want to. Just be clear. The RA requires us to. So unless we remove that language, which it looks like we're not going to be able to, we have to be able to register internet drafts. Otherwise, registries or GTLD registries will not implement any and deploy any IETF drafts.
So I think I want to say two things, Jim Gould. First of all, and I said this in the chat early on, ICANN related issues are not relevant here and they're not material. Okay, so I don't really care what's in the base RA. But I will respond to your comment about the base RA, and I will make the following observation. I think when we bring that into the discussion, what we're confusing is what registries and registrars, well, registries in this case, are allowed to do in production versus what they can do anyway. I am perfectly free to implement whatever the heck I want, putting it in whatever OT&E environment I want, and play around and experiment. And the RA only comes into force and compliance when I want to put it in production. And, that's an ICANN process and I have to go deal with that. But that's not relevant in a technical discussion.
Well, that would not have worked with the launch phase extension. Remember with the original round? All the registries.
There's always exceptions.
No, there.
And ICANN
Well,
has
you
its own
have
exceptions.
You have to address all cases, Jim. You can't ignore that one. And there are many others, like registry fee extension took how long to become an RFC, and many registries implemented them in production ahead of time. Otherwise, we would not have gotten the implementation experience. So it is an actual issue. Yes.
You're assuming that going forward, we're going to do things the same as we did in the past. And I agree with you that we've had problems in the past, and fee extension is a good one. The launch phase thing is a good one. I think that if we're going to establish more of these I'll call them harder or stricter guidelines, and that's what the registry is going to have, then those of us who participate in the IETF are going to have to take account of that and to recognize that. And we're going to have to behave properly on the ICANN side. I think that from a technical point of view, all right, what we allowed on the technical side was we didn't have these hard guidelines about internet drafts being registered and using them and doing things like that. Well, now we participate here, and if we know we have an ICANN requirement to do things in a certain way, we're going to want to abide by whatever rules are here. So we're going to do the ICANN stuff in parallel, or we're going to move this along quicker. I agree with you. That fee extension took years, well beyond what it should have. Let's look at the internationalized email addresses, the same thing. That's on, you and I and other registries. That's our fault.
Yeah, but your business is not going to wait until it becomes an RFC to implement. So the only alternative is to create a proprietary version of it, like what you did with the IDN mapping, correct?
Yeah, well, we make choices.
Is that the pattern that should be followed going forward? So if there's an internet draft out there that needs to be implemented by a registry, we need to create a proprietary version of it and get it registered.
Let's see, what's the right way to frame this? I think that I think from a technology point of view, we are each driven by our own private agendas from a business point of view. And I get that. And we all know that, we just try not to bring that to the front here when we're in the IETF. And the same thing with ICANN requirements, yeah, we all have certain obligations, just like you have, privacy laws and regulations that we're all, obligated to. And those are always in our own minds as we drive standards forward. So what I would say is that if we want to drive standards forward with those things in mind, that's on us. But I don't think it's fair to put those obligations on the IETF to have to pay attention to. We've got to find a better technical argument for why we want something. So I'm still going to be on the side of an internet draft should not be registered. Wow, there's a lot of text going on in the chat room here. I got to catch up on some of that reading there. You know, they should not be registered, and, you know, registries can do whatever they want. You're right that the internet draft process in creating a standard, if we're creating a standard and we have externalities as a business interest, we have externalities that are impacting us, it's our personal responsibility, all right, to manage that. It's not the IETF.
Well, Jim, let me interrupt for just a second. My concern is that there will be less interest in standardizing extensions. What will wind up happening if we make it so hard to register an extension in the EPP extension registry, you can't implement a draft, which will take years to become RFC. The path of choice for registries will go proprietary. That's
Whose
what I'm
fault is that,
concerned with.
Jim?
Because I've done both. I've done proprietary for over 10 years, created 20 plus EPP extensions, and I've gone down the IETF route. This will force me back down the proprietary route. That's my concern.
Yeah, you know,
and that's okay. That REGEXT will not be working on EPP extension standards.
That's on you. If that's your business goal, is to not create standards, that's fine, and that's on you.
Yeah. Okay.
And, you know, you're right. It can take a long time to create standards. I'm not going to deny that. I mean, we're all guilty of that, but that's the point. It's our responsibility to move this process along. You know, I mean, make your business choice.
I think I'm concerned about our industry. That's what we're putting too much hurdles on the EPP extension registry. We have the RA that's forcing us to register, and then it will force registries to create like extensions. That's the end result.
Yeah, but the IETF cannot be responsive to that RA at ICANN any more than it's directly responsive to laws and regulations and other things.
I get it.
That's on us, you and I personally, and our businesses and other businesses like us. I see Jody on this call, registrars, you know, I mean, that's on us to make sure that we efficiently use the IETF process to get where we need to go.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree that we don't want drafts in there, but we're being forced to. So.
All right. Let me see if I'm understanding correctly. Most of the people in the beginning of the call was inclining for allow the registration, but maybe don't require the registration of the namespace and the schemas. And Jim have a really strong opinion to don't allow the registration of the internet drafts. Somebody else have this opinion as well.
I have a question whether or not it should be the expert review guidance that should actually say, you know, whether or not an internet draft is abandoned or not. So when it's in the process of becoming a standard and it's not abandoned, then it's not accepted as stable documentation. But when it is abandoned and the working group had a working group last call and there was no consensus that it should be a standard track document, then it can be registered, it can be used as and registered as a proprietary extension. Because when that happens, right, when I write an internet draft and our working group does not reach consensus that this is a standard extension, I can also take the text of the internet draft, publish it on another website, and use that as my stable documentation for my proprietary extension. The only difference is it's not on the IETF website. And that has a higher risk that documentation will not be stable.
Well, the other issue
Actually,
is copyright issue.
there's another difference.
We need to address the copyright issue concerns on that.
James, please. I mean, he was the first one.
Jim was first, yes. James.
Yeah. So there is another difference, Antoine. It's not just that it's on a different site, okay? Because you're right. At least if you come up a level, all right, it's easy to say that any proprietary extension, that document, we don't know the lifetime of that document. We don't know its life cycle at all. But the thing about an internet draft is the life cycle is defined. We know the life cycle. It lives for 6 months and it's out. And
so you mean that there's no other possibility for proprietary extension to document than an internet draft?
No, as a proprietary extension, I can put a document up anywhere in any way I like in any format I care about, and that's fine. And that the life cycle of that document is not well defined. So the presumption, it's being given the presumption of having a persistent life, and therefore can be registered, because that's all we do. Exactly. But in the IETF side, you have an internet draft. No, that life cycle, it's defined and it's specified. And therefore, it doesn't, in my mind at least, the working group here can decide that we want to look at this differently. But specification required to me means it at least has to have the expectation of persistence, and internet drafts don't. And therefore they can't be registered.
Do you know where that is defined, Jim?
Specification required? Oh,
no,
what I'm saying?
The life cycle of an internet draft.
They say work in progress on the internet drafts.
Yeah, and if you try to link to it, it won't actually come up the first time. When you, after 6 months, it says it's expired, and it comes up and it tells you that.
Yeah, specification required, by the way, is in I think RFC 8126, and it says stable. So the one internet draft, you could make an argument the one internet draft that's already in there should not be in there.
Yes. Well, again, we weren't really careful about all of that in the past, and so fair enough. There are other mistakes. Well, there are other ambiguities that exist in the registry, which we clearly don't want to allow going forward. And so we're going to be careful about that.
Yeah.
But,
to be clear, I'm not advocating removing the one that's in there, but I'm just stating that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's fair. And I agree with you. I mean, you change the rules, you got to grandfather what's there kind of thing. And all that is fine. Jim Gould did quickly mention, we put it in the chat room too, about we do have the issue, Antoine, you were talking about what if somebody takes an internet draft and then they just make it their own and they publish it and do that kind of thing. And you're right. There are other issues like the copyright issue. That's an interesting question to bring up. But again, that's not a technical issue for us. That becomes an external problem someone should have to deal with. And wow, Gavin, are you still standing? That doesn't sound good. All that noise. Wow, you're still there, right?
I am here. Yes. So I wanted to just make a comment to say that if an abandoned internet draft gets converted into a proprietary extension, I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. In fact, I don't even see it as a bad thing that it gets converted into multiple proprietary extensions, because that tells us something as a community. It tells us there is a demand and a use case for that extension, and maybe the working group should consider again about not taking it further to RFC's process, because it gives the operators enough information to say people want and are using this. Let's actually get this done as an RFC, and then everyone can standardize on the RFC, and then we can delete all these duplicate entries. I think there is a value there to allowing that process to take place. And I hadn't considered your point, Jim Galvin, about internet drafts not being stable documents, and you're absolutely correct, and that they should have taken that into consideration, and that has affected my view on this as a thought.
And I also want to say the comment that you just made about other people copying internet drafts. I mean, you're right. Jim Gould that's part of what he's getting at too. People just creating all kinds of proprietary things. I mean, our overall process allows that. We have a lot of IANA registries that allow exactly that. Antoine was right when he was first talking that this working group was created to to ideally standardize extensions. But again, this gets back to one of the points I was making earlier. In order to do that, you can either depend on the designated experts who review the extensions to notice that there's a bunch of duplicates in there, or the obligation is on us as individual participants in the IETF who have business interests to want to promote standardized things and work that process, as opposed to doing an end run around all of that because we're not interested in the IETF. And maybe that's, a place where the designated experts can help as they are looking at proprietary things. They can start to raise questions. They can't stop a registration, but maybe they can raise questions and cause the IETF to want to get involved in doing something. I mean, I don't know, but thanks.
Jim, before you go, can I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
It's about your position. So your position is no internet drafts, or would you accept internet drafts as long as there's some sort of way of removing the ones that aren't active, accepting the one that's grandfathered in?
So my personal coming in position is no internet drafts, okay? Because I just think that's a violation of the definition of the registry, all right? However, I'm not hard over about it. If the working group instead wants to do, like you're saying, come up with all of the right guidelines about controlling the registration of things that are, not persistent, I'm not going to get in the way of that. I mean, I'll just, check that it's all logical and consistent. Is that fair?
Yes, that works. Thanks.
But then we still have the question, of course, Jim, that, for any documentation that is not an RFC or an internet draft, that is considered stable documentation, do they need to register their namespace and schemas?
I think the answer to that is yes, personally. And since they can't use an IETF namespace, or at least that needs to become a new rule too,
yes,
then I don't see a problem with that.
and then
As
that's
long
the
as they
guidance that needs
register
to
it.
be in the document, right? If you want
Yeah.
to do a proprietary extension with, no informational or other RFC or standard track RFC, you cannot use the IETF namespace.
Yes, and I think that's personally, that would be my coming in position, that only IETF documents use the IETF namespace. So, and that's the way we deal with that.
Next
All
in the
right.
queue.
Oh yeah, Yazdip's got his hand up. And he
Yeah,
just said that
Jessi's
in the
has been
chat
forever
room.
in the queue.
Yeah. We need some new voices.
Jasdik, please.
Hi, I think Scott is in front of me. Scott, go ahead, please.
I think he's having problems.
You hear?
We can hear you, Scott. No.
So sound back.
Is that better?
Yes.
I think so, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. It turns out my microphone was under the lid of a closed laptop. Anyway, so given a couple of thoughts here, I think Jim Galvin brought this up a moment ago. I have some real concerns about modifying or putting text in 7451 that allows registration of drafts as long as we are using a specification required registration policy. As Antoine shows from 5226, it describes what a specification is, and I do not think a draft meets that requirement.
Okay.
And while we as a group might say, yeah, we're okay with this, eventually this document is going to have to go through IETF last call and IESG evaluation, and I think we'll get bitten and told, sorry, this doesn't quite cut it. And the only way we'd be able to do this then is if we were to use some other registration policy other than specification required. And I just don't think that there's another one available to us. Yeah, we can create exception for IDs. It's a lot of work, Andy, and I just don't know that it's worth it. There's question number 2 then. If we allow registration of drafts, who actually registers them? We haven't talked about that yet. Would this be something the working group has to do? Do individuals do it? Who has the right to register them? So if
The one
you're
that registers the extension, right?
I'm sorry?
The one that registers the extension.
Yeah, but the drafts are an extension by themselves. What's the process for then registering them once a draft exists? We'd have to come up with that. And right now we don't have a process. Right? We talked a little bit about how do we deal with multiple versions of drafts, something else to consider. So anyway, I think there's lots of open questions here. My position, don't allow registration of drafts. Thank you.
I'm sort of like, you know, having heard Jim's reply that, you know, internet drafts aren't considered to be stable documents, and yours too now, Scott, I'm going to incline there too, actually.
I'm sorry, Antoine, you're saying you're inclining to don't allow the internet drafts?
Yes, but then I still have the question, you know, if a specification required document for a proprietary extension is allowed, what do you do with registering this namespace and schemas? Again, I want to give the example of, you know, I have a license plate registry. I want to use EPP. I have a perfectly stable document of my EPP extension. Should I, you know, before I can register my EPP extension, proprietary EPP extensions, should I register my namespace?
I would say yes, because as long as you're not using an IETF URN, all it is just sending an email, and that happens. So yes, I think so.
Okay.
All right, Justin, can we try again? Maybe your mic is better now.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, but a little bit of echo.
Yay! Sorry guys, I don't have much skin in the game, but it's very interesting, and I'm interested in from some other perspectives. That's why I'm participating. Just a couple of points. Number one, I think the perspective I'll bring is that I heard Jim Gold, for instance, talk about the policy part. So the way sometimes, and I've studied the current XML registry, so on and so forth. I think one point I'll make is that, so there are, in the end, all said and done, if you guys agree, there are 2 things here. IETF specifications in the end, which are RFCs, or they're proprietary, as Gavin was saying, you know, eventually something gets abandoned, it can morph into one or more proprietary specifications. The second point I heard was that there's a collision, and we don't want to squat on IETF namespace. That's absolutely a fair point. But I was looking at, for instance, the RPKI OID registry. I don't know how many of you guys know about the RPKI part, which is in the Internet Routing Security side. But they also register object IDs on a provisional basis so that the development can start. And there's, of course, an expert who looks at it. And then there's a reference to an internet draft with the intention of actually finishing that internet draft. What does that mean? It becoming an RFC. So the question comes down to is that, can we have the cake and eat it too, rather than totally banning internet drafts, as Jim Gelman was saying, and a few others. So, and at the same time, by the way, this provisional aspect, this is probably point number 2, what Scott made in his presentation. The media type registry does it differently, and I have been following that discussion, and I don't think so they've totally abandoned it, although Andy may correct me. There's a provisional media types registry there, where things either, and I was looking at the latest biz they're working towards, basically they either move it into the real registry, media types, or they abandon it. So point I'm trying to make is, in summary, you have those two eventual states, RFCs or proprietary specifications. Don't squat on the IETF namespace, but if you do want to not squat, but take it up front with the good intent that you will eventually provisionally take it, but you'll follow through on it, there should be a mechanism to do that. And I pointed to two of them, which currently exist in the INR registries. It could be a simple field in our, this EPP registry. And my last point would be, hey, I know what Scott said, that was an individual submission, but this looks important enough. I think that the group should consider it as a standards track. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jasdeep. We're running out of time. We only have 4 minutes left. So I suggest to have a poll for having another meeting. I think that's the correct, but I would like to try to see what the people think. So I will start a poll to poll people. So what you think, if we need another meeting.
I'm voting yes, but I think that the meeting should happen in Shenzhen rather than an interim.
That's a good point. Okay, I think most of the people think we should continue the discussion in another meeting. It can be an interim meeting, it can be in China. Maybe because of the time, it will be better to be in China.
I mean, if we can't get the kind of quorum of people who need to be involved together in Shenzhen, then they're not. Yeah, absolutely. Interims is fine. So I don't have a strong opinion on it being an interim. It just it doesn't feel like there's an awful lot of time between now and Shenzhen to put something in the calendar.
Yeah. Okay. Any objection to have continue the discussion in China? Well, I don't see any objection. Any other business? Scott?
Jorge, let me throw one out there. I think most people know this. I'm planning on retiring, like from VeriSign, and it'll probably end up being before the IETF meeting in China.
Oh.
Now that does not mean I'm stepping away from everything completely, okay? But it does mean that there's going to need to be some change, at least to my email address as it appears in the draft. At some point, I think I'd like to talk to you and Jim and Antoine about that, and maybe the possibility of adding another editor to the draft, just so that we don't lose any continuity there.
Okay. So how about we talk, Jim, Antoine, and I talk to you and find a better, if it's better having another interim meeting or we can wait to China.
Yeah, bottom line, we are not going to get through this issue before I retire, okay? So
Is
we
it
need
your
to be
wish?
thinking about this longer term.
As long as we get through it before I retire, that's fine.
All right.
I think there will be time for another interim meeting, right? If we schedule it quickly. I mean, scheduling an interim meeting is not so hard. It's a small group.
But at a minimum, we can get text on the list for discussion.
Yeah, exactly. But I hear some new interesting observations here, today.
Okay.
So put text on the mailing list, because the consensus has to be on the mailing list anyway. And if we still have cannot reach consensus on the mailing list, we just schedule another interim meeting, right?
So let me just quickly summarize. I think that there's still one question in my mind, right? I think we have agreement on for proprietary extensions. Yes, we want to continue to allow to register them, and we want to encourage registration of URIs using non-IETF namespaces.
Yes.
I'll put that on the list. We still have an open question about whether or not we want to allow registration of internet drafts.
Is that something we should call right now? Because I changed my opinion during this meeting from yes to no.
So Anton, I think that requires text for us to talk about. And I'm willing to provide text to propose changes to try to get us past this. The problem is I've proposed text in the past on the mailing list, and it gets lost 15 levels deep in a thread that's 30 messages long. So, I would propose that we put the draft in GitHub so people can actually look at PRs and the actual proposed text doesn't get lost in email.
So the basic question here is, do we consider internet draft to be stable documentation according to specification required?
That's how I'll phrase the question on the list, Antoine.
Yes, because if we say no, internet drafts are not stable documentation, then there is no discussion left, right? Then they're not allowed as proprietary extension documentation.
I mean, there's not our decision to make, though. It's already, I think, the settled position of the IESG that internet drafts are not stable documents.
Then that's clear, right?
I think I'll just add one thing. That's absolutely fine, what you guys said. But should a URN namespace, IETF URN namespace, be provisionally provided for that document, which is not yet stable, to your point, because it's a work in progress, but should that be allowed? I think that's the key question as I'm listening.
Well, we don't have change control over the registration rules for the XML registry. So we have to abide by the rules that are already in place for the XML registry. All we can do is give guidance to people who want to register in the extension registry on what namespace to use for their proprietary extension.
That makes sense, Gavin. What you're saying is go with proprietary URI initially, but if it eventually becomes, is that what you're saying? If it eventually becomes an RFC, or we're very, very sure as a group, then get a IETF URN namespace?
Yes.
Thanks.
All right. I'm a little confused here. So
I think Scott made a very good summary, Jorge, that we all agreed that the registration of namespace and schema should occur, but we only allow IETF namespace registrations for RFCs. And the only open question still is do we need extra text to say that we don't consider internet drafts as stable documentation for proprietary extension?
all right. Can we put this summary into the list and see what the people think, and depending on the result, find out if we need another interim meeting?
I'll volunteer to do that, Jorge.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
See you next time.
See ya.
Cheers. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.